And credit to you, because after having the conversation, you actually invited me to talk to you and to call you, and kudos to you, because most of the people that I deal with don't even think that I'm human. They kind of want to dehumanize me. They don't want to engage me in a conversation. So thank you. I really
appreciate that.
I think that a lot of people, it's ostensibly about the methods of what we do, but in reality, it's about the findings. It's actually not about the methods. It's used as a kind of an excuse. This is a common theme. It's the ethics of recording someone. Like David Wright was in a bar in New Hampshire, and do we want to live in a world where our likeness can be broadcasted and transmitted instantly to everybody? A lot of people don't want to live in that world. My argument is going to be, and has been my whole life, that reporters, there's a routine nature in journalistic methods to both utilize deception and to broadcast things to the world that are not as accurate as a camera would be. The camera is a more accurate version of the events in question. So surely, not just from a legal perspective, but from a moral one, we would consider it unreasonable to place ethical restrictions on recording someone when we don't place restrictions on someone writing what they said down with a pencil and paper and shouting it from the rooftops 5 minutes later, because the recording does the individual more justice than secondhand hearsay. Words are a different medium. So when it comes to the methods, you have a choice to make. You can either, from my perspective, deceive your audience, or you can, for lack of a better word, deceive the person that you're interviewing such that you can tell the truth to the audience. And one is worse than the other, and you only have these two choices. And that's what Gunther Wallraff, who's a hero of mine, he was a legendary undercover reporter in Germany. He's still alive. He's in his 70s. And this man said, and I don't like the way he utilizes the word deception, but he says, my task is to deceive in order not to be deceived, to break the rules of the game in order to disclose the secret rules of the power structure. And a lot of ethicists have basically said the same thing. And when it comes to this sort of journalism, it's you only have two choices. You can hate the methods, but then you're going to broadcast lies to the public. And telling the truth to the public is paramount. The public has a right to know this information. The mass media has become so far gone, an industrial system of this production that manufacturers consent, that we're getting to the point now where I believe these methods are universally justifiable because the media is so broken. And I have a choice to make. I can repeat what they say to me at a podium or into a microphone, or I can use disguise, which we believe is morally necessary. And I would even go so far as to say it's actually immoral not to use disguise. If the only way that you can get to that truth is to use disguise, and other reporters throughout the 20th century agreed with me, many of those people are not alive anymore. But at this point, it's gotten so bad that we think that these tactics are completely necessary because we live in a country where the public's right to know is very important. We cherish the First Amendment. That's in short order why we believe that undercover work, pretending to be something that you're not in order to extract truths from people, are not just justified, they're morally necessary in this environment.
So can we both say that were it possible to get at the truth without using deception, it would be better to do it if that was possible in that circumstance?
Society of Professional Journalists, I think it was in the early 70s, said, because they always throw this stuff at me, the Society of Professional Journalists. I don't know who the journalism gods are that came up with these rules. But the Society of Professional Journalists said, you only use it as a last resort. And I would submit to you that we're basically there, that we have a last resort in our society. The thing that I've learned doing this is that, and the New York Times did a front page attempted hit piece on me literally 1 week ago. And in this, it was about like spies. Some people in the intel community were helping train some of our people. And there was a paragraph in this front page New York Times. It was chock full with circumstantial evidence. One of the paragraphs said, it's not clear what the relationship is between Trump and O'Keefe and so forth and so on. That one little paragraph, the way they worded that, it was literally, it's just not clear. That was the meat of their argument. It's not clear was the extent of their evidence. And then that justified a circumstantial headline, which was used to create I don't know if it was Common Cause or some left-leaning ethics group filing complaint against me. And what it is it's what Daniel Boorstin, the former Library of Congress, calls a pseudo-event. The shadow has become the substance. These people create these fake things. And number two, what happens is that people in the government, these I call them beat reporters. They have a source in government which leaks them information. And then reportedly this happened. That leak, that thing, which I don't do that, but I'm not a beat, I'm an investigative reporter, which is a huge world of difference. A beat reporter depends upon these people in the power structure to feed them intelligence. It's like a counterintelligence operation. Someone in the government, some two-star general, talks to the New York Times, and we don't know who that two-star general is. We don't know their name. We don't know what motivates them. We don't know why they're doing it. We don't know what they're saying. We don't know the full quote. And this is the status quo of journalism.
Possible. So you have two objectives. One is you want to inform the public, and you want to deceive the source as little as possible. I don't think that you're at the point where you have to trade off one to get the other. I think you could actually deceive less and get more. Okay. Now, I could be wrong about that.
Okay.
One thing you could do, for example, just to limit the damage to human beings, would be to pixelate people and say, this is a senior reporter. We disguise the voice. We've pixelated the image. Our interest isn't the reporter. The reporter is only as important as that chair. And our focus is on the chair. And if you did that, at some level, you would say, look, I'm not trying to humiliate somebody. I'm not trying to make them unemployable. I'm trying to say, you've got a problem in the news media. What is your problem? And it would be seen differently.
Okay.
It would be seen as his focus isn't the issue of sticking it to the enemy. His focus is trying to get journalism to function properly.
And I think that investigative reporting does, in fact, harm people. I do think it does. And that's the premise. It's an outcome of truth-telling. And if your goal is to limit damage to people, it's going to, maybe this is where we disagree, come into conflict with investigative reporting. Your point about pixelating faces, I think about this a lot. I think about the ethics of this a lot. And what makes what we do a renaissance, to your point about the 20th century in reporting, it is a renaissance. Newspaper men used to do all this stuff, and we could talk about this later in the show or right now, whatever you're preferable. It is the only way to slip the disc, so to speak, in my view. The only way is to focus on a shift in the medium. The fact that we don't pixelate the faces, the fact that like Alinsky says, pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it. The fact that you have an actual person.
Is Alinsky a fan?
Saul Alinsky.
You a fan of his?
I'm not a fan of him. He's stating what I think is a reality about forcing a reaction.
Yeah, I'm a progressive who can't stand Alinsky.
Well, I don't agree with.
So you're a conservative who actually thinks it's interesting.
No, it's not. It's not binary. I don't like Alinsky. I'm quoting something he's saying.
No, I appreciate that.
A universal truth about human behavior. If you pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it, you're more prone to generate a reaction. We can talk about this later.
Sure.
That I think slips the disc. So when you don't pixelate the face, when you show the intonation, the body language, the cadence, the way that the man looks in his eyes. Patrick Davis at CNN, when we covertly filmed him, he was an unwitting whistleblower. He was not a villain. He was not a villain. And some ethicists might say, well, why would you put that poor managing editor at CNN on blast? And I said, because CNN is played in airports. That's why. Because you are a few standard deviations away from the mean, Eric. Most people in airports look at that and goes, that's the truth. And when the managing editor, I can't recall his exact title, managing director of field operations, Patrick Davis, sits in that bar, this was filmed last year, and says, I hate what we've become. This is what Patrick Davis says on the hidden camera. We could be so much better than we are. That's a direct quote. I don't even listen to the CEO or the president's calls anymore. I'm disgusted by it. Is what he's saying. And I have to make an evaluation, a means-ends evaluation on, do I blur this man's face? And I say no. Why? Because in my view, in a world where the media is more powerful than all three branches of the government of the United States, which we can talk about that if you disagree with me, I have an obligation to tell the people about what this man who basically controls all of this stuff happening on CNN,
I understand
what
the
he
argument.
believes.
If I look at what happened, for example, with the Amy Robach tape, do you want to say a little bit about how you see that, and then I'll come back to it and say how I see it as being significant?
How I see it in general?
Well, just that you broadcast it to the world, and I think it's an incredibly important and interesting piece of footage. But our listeners may not be aware.
Amy Robach was this is back in November of last year. We had an insider within ABC News record this hot mic moment where Amy Robach is the anchor on Good Morning America, and she comes across very credible in this tape. She's a very attractive blonde female anchor, and she's bemoaning how ABC spiked the Jeffrey Epstein story. They had victims, they had all this evidence, and she's really upset that she didn't get the scoop. And she says that she testifies, this is a hot mic moment during the commercial break, that it was to protect the Clintons and the British royal family. So I've been doing this for 11 years in a really major way. This is by far the most viral this is like a 90-second piece of film, and it was like the most viral thing I'd ever seen. It was an indictment to so many of what we're talking about here today.
I'm like holding back emotion. It was so powerful, right? It's like, okay. Now, it took me 6 months to get up the courage to say, I wonder why it is almost no news outfit will ask the question, is Jeffrey Epstein known to the intelligence communities of the world? And is his pedophilia known? And did we sit idly by while 12-year-old girls and up or down, I don't even know, were being trafficked in the most powerful circles in the world? I mean, is somebody going to ask the questions where his fortune came from and where the trading records were? I'm trying to map the silences of the news media. I'm much more interested in what they don't say, don't report, don't do. And this thing that I'm calling the DISC, Distributed Idea Suppression Complex, is perfectly illustrated by Amy Robach. And you, so far as I know, simply broadcast the video in an unedited form that was leaked to you.
Something to that effect. We have this insider program. It's actually quite extraordinary thing, if I could mention it for a minute. We have these people on the inside of these institutions who they do have confidentiality agreements with their employers, et cetera, but what's remarkable is they might strap a camera to their chest or simply record and give that to us. And in some cases, Eric, these insiders go public and go on the record, sit down and become a hero or a martyr. In this case, this is a rare exception where this person is still working there, and Disney Corporation, quarantined every employee and grilled them for hours, and they still have not been able to identify this person. So this was recorded, and it was a remarkable moment. It was on the same type of standard. Amy Robach did not know.
Yeah.
She knew insofar as she was wearing a lav mic.
It's an incredible piece of footage. And then, if I recall correctly, she comes back in sort of almost a lobotomized fashion, apologizing for what she said. Yeah.
So what happened was, again, I'm speculating here, but I'm pretty safely speculating. ABC News.
Actually, you don't need to.
ABC News issues a statement.
Yeah.
And the statement is, that at the time, not all of our standards met our reporting for air. It was very robotic, corporate statement justifying why they didn't.
I regret that some of the intemperate things that I may have said in a moment of frustration were picked up.
Of frustration was the words. Yeah.
I don't know that she used that.
She did. It was actually quite literally, quote, moment of frustration.
Okay, I didn't know that. It's a canonical.
There was Amy's statement and there was ABC News' statement.
Whatever it is, it's freaking scary.
Yeah.
Right? Because the idea is that you're seeing, it's like somebody's recanting their testimony
exactly
in North Korea, and that there's like a gun held to the person's head, or you're watching a hostage video or something like that. The game is that anything that comes through James O'Keefe and anything that comes through Project Veritas cannot be trusted.
Right.
That's what they've done. They fitted you with a shit suit, and your shit suit is you are so psychopathic, so non-reliable, that even what appears to be continuous unedited footage can be completely discounted if it appears as Project Veritas.
And that has not stopped us.
Well, not only has it not stopped you, it creates a really interesting dilemma. First of all, that tactic that is being used against you is manifestly stupid and unethical. I also agree that you've been fitted with this thing so that if you're handed a piece of footage and you run it, and it is appropriate for you to run it, that footage immediately becomes inadmissible in what I've called the gated institutional narrative, which is the Washington Post discussing the New York Times about whatever the Democratic Party said in their engagement at Princeton University, blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
That thing is trying to seal itself off from the internet. So the idea is that there are authoritative sources, and then there's the garbage that happens online, which is ridiculous.
If I didn't invent or create Project Veritas and some other person did, they'd do the same thing to that person. No matter who it would be, they would slime and slander and defame. However, what's interesting about the Amy Robach tape and the David Wright tape, both of which came within ABC News, is that the president of ABC News did in fact return my phone call the day before. I called him for comment. I did the ethical thing. And they did in fact issue a response. And that response did in fact make it into the Washington Post. In fact, the Washington Post ran 3 articles on the same day. We were in fact one on the front page of the style section. This was a couple weeks ago, where they said reporter suspended over, and they had to put the quotes from David Wright bemoaning the fact that his corporate bosses, this and that, the stuff that your audience all agrees. That's in the print edition on the front page of the style section, thanks to Project Veritas. Now, here's the rub, as Shakespeare would say. That insider, when I met that person, I'm not going to tell you their gender. I'm not going to tell you anything about them, except this. When I met that person in a hotel room, it was like a scene out of All the President's Men, like literally out of a thriller novel. And we're having this unbelievable conversation, which if there was any justice in the world, there'd be a movie made out of this one day. This person says, I had nowhere to go. I couldn't go to the Washington Post.
No,
I couldn't go to the New York Times. They were like, I can't go anywhere because, and I'm going to quote them here, they'd hunt me down like a trophy buck. Not only would they not tell this story, my story, they would systematically, this is what you were saying, hunt me down. And this person said, I had to go someplace. Just let me finish what he said. He said, I had to go someplace that I knew no matter what, this person wouldn't give me up, wouldn't quit, wouldn't stop, wouldn't settle lawsuits, which is this thing we should talk about in this episode. And there was only one institution in the world I could think that would do that. Project Veritas. Now, I'll also tell you that when Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, there were no, hidden cameras. Upton Sinclair was an extreme ideologue as far as I'm concerned. He was a socialist, and he cared about worker participation. I don't think he set out to expose the meat conditions. He wanted to he's an advocate for socialism. When he infiltrated, went undercover, posing with a lunch pail and taking off his tie to fit in with the workers, he didn't even have I don't even believe he had a writing utensil. I think he sprinted back to his hotel room to write down from memory what he saw. So we would make the argument that the recording itself is distinguished from the broadcasting of the recording, and that recording someone is a fundamental human right, just like writing down what they say is a fundamental human right. And to restrict someone from saying what they hear goes back to my argument about the First Amendment. Investigative reporters back in the day, they were newspapers, and they were typewriter guerrillas, as they were called. I call myself a guerrilla journalist. I use video as my medium. But these guys did things like, there was a guy named William Gaines who dressed up like a janitor in early 70s, 1972, 1973, and got a job at a hospital. He literally employed himself as a janitor. And the surgeons would say, hey, can you come assist me with surgery? And without even washing his hands, he was asked to participate in doing surgery on somebody. Oh, and also he won the Pulitzer Prize. So I would never do that. I would never. Can you imagine James O'Keefe gets a job as a janitor, assists in fixing someone with the coronavirus? I would be the bacteria on my hands would get inside.
Wasn't Gloria Steinem a Playboy bunny?
Gloria Steinem was a Playboy bunny. But you had these reporters, Clark Molinoff at the Iowa newspaper. You had, Bob Woodward lied to Deep Throat. Jack Anderson in the 1970s. And all of these people were hated. I mean, hated by the system while they were doing this.
Right.
They were despised. They were attacked by the establishment media. And then something changed. And what we were talking about on the phone was what I think changed.
Well, there was this old line about what are the 10 most feared words in corporate America.
Mike Wallace
from 60 Minutes is here to see you.
Yes. Mike Wallace used to ambush people in boardrooms, and then something happened in the late 70s. I trace it to this incident. I wrote this book called American Pravda, and I researched the 1970s journalism. And what happened, what I saw was that in 1977, the Chicago Sun-Times, which was the center of all this muckraking newspaper reporting, ran this bar for like 7 months. They bought a bar under disguise, and it was bartended by newspaper people. And they put cameras in the rafters of this bar, aptly named the Mirage. They actually called the thing the Mirage. It was kind of ironic. And they filmed all of the city inspectors taking bribes, bribing each other, payoffs, and asked. Pam Zeckman was working at the Chicago Sun-Times, Pulitzer Prize winner. They were asked, why did you have to resort to all this so-called deception? They said, because everyone was afraid of Chicago City Hall. None of these people would talk, not even on background, not even off the record. So they ran this bar, and I mean, this was like the most consequential, in my opinion, investigation of the 20th century. Like 50 people went to jail. The mayor lost re-election. It was just such a consequential, impactful thing. So it gets nominated for the Pulitzer Prize, 1978. And Ben Bradley, who's the legendary editor of the Washington Post, says, no, we're not going to give you a Pulitzer Prize because your deception was too elaborate. Your deception was too much. And I think the quote was, when cops pose as journalists, we don't like that. So we shouldn't pose as something that we're not. And that was one of a few inflection points in American history, because there was no currency in doing this. It's expensive, first of all, which I can talk about and how expensive this stuff is. And then you had Mike Wallace in the mid 80s. Mike Wallace, 60 Minutes, said it became about drama, not illumination. I think that both Ben Bradley and Mike Wallace were disingenuous. I don't think that was the real reason they stopped doing it. I think that argument, which is one we can have today, relates more to economics of mass media. And Ben Bradley probably was a little close to people in the Chicago machine, and Bradley reportedly, these are not my sources, had contracts with people in government and so forth and so on, and it became this mass media had a symbiotic relationship with those in power, and using these tactics is just too close for comfort. You're burning these institutions, agencies, and things that you need access to get your information from. So it got cut off in the 70s and 80s. And finally, ABC News in 1992 got sued by a grocery store, Food Lion.
By a chain of groceries.
By a chain, it's called Food Lion Grocery. Again, they got jobs working in the butcher shop, and they put hidden cameras in their wig. Like you might be able to fit a camera in that hairdo of yours. And they had wigs on.
Why do you think I grow it this way?
Like tiny little thing. And they filmed the meat was rotting, and they repackaged the meat. So this was
like bleach or something.
With bleach. The meat was rotting. It was a devastating expose. Food Lion stock tanked. They got sued, ABC did. They lost at trial. They won on appeal. It cost, God knows, over $1 million. And ABC's brass basically said, to hell with this. We're not going to spend $1 million. There's nothing in it for us. So investigative reporting was not profitable. It was not profitable. It wouldn't get you the Pulitzer Prizes. It wouldn't get you the trophies.
Wait. I want to do your point even more than you're doing your point. People are going to hear that as like, oh, is that why you're doing reporting, to get a Pulitzer Prize? That's not the point.
No.
Let me do it.
Yeah.
Let me do it. Okay. My belief is that the Pulitzer Prize, to say nothing of where the Pulitzer fortune came from, was intended to say this is heroic behavior. This is admirable behavior. And when you took away the prize, it was the community saying, we no longer want to see this as heroic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that message, rather than the prize, is the chill.
I think
And
it's one of the reasons.
part of
I'm the chairman and CEO of the company, and I had to be the chairman to have the authority to make decisions like not to settle lawsuits. 60 Minutes got sued over 150 times in the 1980s. 100, maybe even more than that. All of the reporters I mentioned earlier in the 1970s were some of them went to jail to protect their sources. They were sued for libel.
Yeah.
Investigative reporters had to deal with all that stuff. And to your point, in this age, I'm vilified for having to deal with all that stuff. Back in the day, it was considered to be a thing. So
you'd go to jail for your sources.
100%.
You've been to jail.
I've been to jail. We can talk about that. But not only does the reporter have to be willing to go to jail, the reporter has to be willing to appeal it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And if the Supreme Court determines that you have to disclose your source, the reporter has to be civil disobedient.
Yeah.
That's what you have to believe in your heart to do this.
You're a very unusual person. You are driven by something which is not money. There are easier ways to turn a buck than what you're doing.
Right.
You are driven by, I think, I could be wrong, in part, an ideological need to get at certain things that are going unreported anywhere. In essence, there are a tiny number of places that can break a story like the stories that you're breaking.